Up next on this edition of History Center, November 22nd, 1963. 3 shots. 8 seconds.
Witnesses said they saw blood streaming from his head.
And 39 years of the ultimate conspiracy in American history. Maybe. Lone gunman or sinister plot? Questions remain. Why was Kennedy riding in an open motorcade? How did Oswald get the job at the Texas School Book Depository? And if Oswald was indeed the gunman, then why didn't he take his shot sooner, when the president's motorcade was in full view, as seen here in this government reenactment of the assassination? There are as many conspiracy theorists as there are theories. Author-journalist Gus Russo believes Oswald was indeed the triggerman, but was part of a much larger conspiracy involving Cuba's Fidel Castro. David Lifton believes Oswald was innocent and suggests a much deeper conspiracy perpetrated by high-ranking government officials, possibly including Lyndon Johnson. But for many, Gerald Posner's Case Closed is the final word on the JFK assassination, methodically dismantling each of the more plausible theories, pointing the finger at just one man, Lee Harvey Oswald. 3 shots, 8 seconds, and 39 years of the ultimate conspiracy in American history. Maybe. That's next on this special edition of History Center.
Welcome to History Center. I'm Steve Gillen. Joining me here in the studio today are 3 of the leading authorities on the Kennedy assassination: Gus Russo, David Lifton, and Gerald Posner. These gentlemen have written extensively about the assassination, but they have never appeared together to debate the assassination, and that's what's going to take place today. We also have in front of us a replica of the alleged weapon that Lee Harvey Oswald used to assassinate John F. Kennedy, if you believe Lee Harvey Oswald actually assassinated Kennedy. This is what I want to do in this first segment. Since you have very different views of the Kennedy assassination, I want to give each of you 90 seconds to explain your position. And then we're going to come back and give you each the opportunity to question one another. So, Gus, why don't you go first? You have 90 seconds. What is your position? Who shot John F. Kennedy and why?
Well, my position, based on many years of research that I did for my book, I came to the conclusion that Oswald indeed shot the president, that there was no evidence of a conspiracy in Dealey Plaza itself. The Warren Commission got that right. What I found was most fascinating, though, the deeper I got into the new documentation that's come out over the years, is that the Warren Commission was insulated from a lot of information that they should have known about that would have caused them to see if Oswald was a hired gun, specifically foreign policy information, which was kept from the Warren Commission, information that would talk about Cuba, because Oswald was pro-Castro, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion. In the Warren Commission's opinion, he was pro-Castro. Nonetheless, they had no motive why a pro-Castro guy would shoot President Kennedy. Well, had they had known what was going on vis-a-vis Washington and Cuba, they might have had a motive. They could have looked for a motive. And a lot of things were kept from the Warren Commission about Oswald's travels, who he was in touch with. The CIA knew these things. We know this now from their documentation, that when Oswald went to Mexico City, the CIA was informed that there were dangerous people he was meeting in the Cuban embassy and outside of the Cuban embassy, and these things were not passed on. So the commission was sort of flailing about for a motive, and they could never put it together.
Okay, thank you. David Lifton, you have 90 seconds.
Well, to begin with, I do not believe Oswald shot President Kennedy. I believe he's totally innocent of the shooting. The reason he appears to have shot President Kennedy is the result of falsified evidence. Basically, the body of the president was altered. There's a false autopsy here which falsely links the gun found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository,
the replica of
the gun, and there's 3 shells up there and all the rest of it, to the crime that takes place in the street below. Absent the falsification of that autopsy, because of that falsification of the autopsy, is that he appears to be the president's assassin. But let me tell you something about Oswald. You have to know a few things about him. He's, first of all, a phony red. He's a phony Marxist. He joined the Marines at 17 in October '56 when they're putting down the Hungarian Revolution. He did not join the Marines to make the world safe for socialism. His heroes were John Wayne. His authors he loved were Jack London and Ernest Hemingway. His travels have a lot to do with his desire to become a writer. And so he's an excellent poseur. He has all the theatrical skills of a great undercover agent. And when he was in Russia, as my new book, Final Charade, will show, he was definitely on assignment for the Central Intelligence Agency. He has a mission in Russia, but he also has a personal agenda, an adventurous agenda for going there. When he returned from Russia, he was approached by people who recruited him into what he thought was a legitimate covert operation. And he was told to keep pretending he was a Red. He did a lot of things that these guys take seriously as evidence and which provide their so-called motivation. And on November 22nd, with this mail-order rifle that he was told to order, he was, through a false autopsy, implicated in the assassination.
Okay, thank you. Gerald?
Well, you know, I'll tell you, it's very interesting listening, especially to David, because he understands that unless he says the evidence is false, there's only one conclusion if you examine this evidence. The credible evidence here points to one thing happening, and that is that Lee Harvey Oswald, troubled as a youngster, going into the Marines to try to escape this troubled background, finding out that he thought he'd be somebody in the Marines, and instead he's thrown in the shower and called Mrs. Oswald and thought of as being gay, escapes the Marines and goes over and defects to the Soviet Union, where he thinks he'll suddenly be accepted as a hero there, and the Russians think that he's odd. The Russian files are now out. They put him out into Minsk, where he marries a Russian wife. He gets not accepted there at all. He comes back unhappy as a leftist, but also as a mix of anarchy in his new politics to the United States. He decides he's going to commit political assassination and put himself in the history books. You won't hear this from them. Where does he go? He goes and tries to shoot a retired Army general, a right-winger down in Texas, Edwin Walker, and he misses him by this little bit of luck where the bullet hits the windshield and just misses Walker's head. He fails at that. He goes off to New Orleans in the summer of '63, months before the assassination, starts a new organization for the support of his new hero, Fidel Castro, and doesn't get a single person to join his organization. When he's out on the hot streets of New Orleans trying to get them in, he fails again. He goes down to Mexico City, where he's now going to defect over to Cuba and join the Castro Revolution, and the Cubans say, "Get lost, you're too odd." And he comes back to Dallas a couple of months, just a month before that assassination, and all of a sudden John F. Kennedy is given to him on a silver platter. The man who thinks he's going in the history books because he's going to be shooting at Walker and putting himself there gets to shoot at the President of the United States. He's working in the building where the President's motorcade will come by. It's not a suicide mission, but he pulls it off that day with the one shot, then kills a policeman on his escape. That's Lee Harvey Oswald putting himself in the history books.
Whew, that was a lot of information. Well, we've heard the theories. When we come back, we're going to focus on two questions. One, Oswald's motivation, and second, his ability to pull off the assassination. We're going to have this debate for the first time on television. Stay with us. Welcome back to History Center. We're having our debate, first ever debate among leading authors about the Kennedy assassination. And there's so much here. There's so much controversy, so many things we could focus on. I want to zoom in on just two critical issues. The first is, what were Oswald's motivation for shooting Kennedy? And secondly, did he have the ability to pull off the assassination? Now, David, you don't believe Oswald shot Kennedy, so the issue of motivation for you is irrelevant.
Correct. The issue is irrelevant to my standpoint. It's what is the psychology, and was he involved as a secret agent when he went to Russia? Is he a pretender? And when he went to Russia, there's a number of things that indicate that he was a pretender. For the first of all, he was a lover of John Wayne. He joins the Marines, and he's supposedly a socialist. He's joining the Marines at the same time that there's the Hungarian Revolution. He didn't join the Marines to make the world safe for socialism. When he's over there in Russia, he writes a manuscript. He refers to Castro as a fellow traveler. On the way back on the boat, he talks about, he says, when they had convinced themselves that I was the naive American who believed in communism, they let me stay. So to me, this is all indications that he's a phony Marxist.
Phony Marxist?
Boy, I'll tell you, David, if the evidence of him being a phony Marxist is like John Wayne, you haven't convinced me. I mean, this is somebody who I think was really committed not only to the left, he was committed to it, but in my view of Oswald, he also had a bit of sort of anarchy built into his political philosophy. The Lee Harvey Oswald that I came to understand from my study of him was somebody who was capable of being on the 6th floor of a building in downtown Dallas shooting at the President of the United States in November of '63, or could have been on the 6th floor of a building in Moscow shooting at Nikita Khrushchev. He was ready to throw a cog into the machinery of government, and he was standing up to everybody that had abused him in the past, who had fired him from jobs, from Arena, who ridiculed him, those who thought he wasn't smart enough to say, I am somebody, I'm able to kill the President of the United States.
Twice he had kids, in February in '62 and in November in '63, and each time he told Marina he wanted it to be a boy because he wanted his child to grow up to be President of the United States. Some Marxist.
Right, he would have killed his own child.
Is he a phony Marxist?
No, I think he's a real Marxist, but it's he also had some mental instability going on with this guy, and I know Gerald, has that in your work, and I believe that to a degree. The guy, he glommed onto Marxism without, I don't think, understanding it in any great depth. He wanted to belong to something. But I think one consistent theme in his life was Fidel Castro. From the time he joined the Marines at 16 or 17, whatever, he talked about Castro's revolution. A lot of Americans, a lot of liberals, a lot of lefties, latched onto this idea, this romantic revolution. Oswald stayed with it. After he came back from Russia, he joined the tried to join the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. He hands out Viva Fidel pamphlets. He has an argument with his wife. If they were going to have a baby boy, he was going to name it Fidel. She didn't want that.
So let me make sure I understand the positions. You believe that Oswald had no motivation to shoot Kennedy.
Red, white, and blue American.
Red, white, and blue American. You believe he's actually pro-Cuban. But you think he's a nut.
Yeah, no, nut is too easy to say about him. I think he was certainly unstable, and it's one of the reasons I believe he was so unstable that no intelligence agency would use him. Even the Cubans and the Russians were too smart not to use him. And those files are now out. We now know from the intelligence people that they thought there was something strange about him. The United States wouldn't use him. It was that instability that ran through his life. And David, of course he might want his child to grow up to become the president of the United States. What good Marxist wouldn't to change the system and overthrow it if that's the case? Well, but it doesn't mean he didn't shoot the president. Hinckley was a red, white, and blue American and still shot at Reagan, so it doesn't mean anything to me. But in the end, when you examine him, this is what's critical to me. I agree with Gus Russo in the sense that Oswald was the shooter. I disagree with you about the extent to which you think he was involved with the Cubans. My problem with David's work is that David realizes that if you accept the evidence that I look at, which is the straightforward evidence, the conclusion is that Oswald is the shooter. And that's why, in the end, I think there are so many things you don't agree with. You think the autopsy was faked.
That's right.
That the autopsy pictures were faked, right? That the X-rays were faked. What about the Zapruder film? Is the Zapruder film faked?
Well, I'm partial to that, but that's not the subject of my current work. My work is on Oswald and his psychology.
Because the Zapruder film, of course, shows that somebody was shooting him from behind.
What is Oswald's best friend doing corresponding with the White House in the spring of 1963? I mean, something is going on here. When you have Oswald very close, his best friend is George de Mohrenschildt, and you've got letters between de Mohrenschildt and the White House in the spring of '63.
George de Mohrenschildt, Oswald's best friend, what did Oswald and de Mohrenschildt talk about the month before the assassination?
The month before the assassination,
right.
No, wait a second.
They weren't associated with each other?
But they
Had
were
de Mohrenschildt already left Oswald's life?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. I missed that.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about his ability to execute the assassination. Sure. You mentioned the Zapruder film. The Zapruder film documents the Kennedy assassination. Now, one of the key components of the Warren Commission is the theory of the magic bullet. Now, Gerald, can you explain for us? We have the weapon here, the supposed weapon that Lee or Harvey Oswald used, and a facsimile of the bullet itself. Tell me what the magic bullet was and why it's important.
Let me tell you, I think this is absolutely critical. If somebody is shooting, if you want to say it's Oswald or whoever else, and I think it's Oswald, shooting the president from behind that day, and I think the Zapruder film shows that the only shots that hit the president and Connally came from behind. One of the theories that the Warren Commission had was that one bullet happened to pierce the high rear neck portion of the president and went on to hit the governor at the same time and came out in relatively good condition, just slightly flattened. That was called the so-called magic bullet. They couldn't prove it at the time. They guessed at it. They worked back into that, as a matter of fact. Specter did, the senator from Pennsylvania. Today you can prove that that happened, and as a matter of fact, this is what the bullet looked like. This is the fully jacketed metal bullet, the 6.5 millimeter shell. That's not the shell, it's just the bullet itself. This is what went through the president that day. That's what hit him in the back of the head. This is a 165 grain bullet. It's a heavy bullet. And if you think that Oswald's not capable of carrying out the assassination or anybody else back there, this is the 9138 Mannlicher Carcano. The only difference from Oswald's is it's a little bit longer on the stock. And as Marina used to describe, he used to sit in New Orleans and all night long operate this bolt, just like this. And anybody who thinks that the bolt's difficult to operate, ask any of you to operate it. You can operate in a matter of a fraction of a second. Oswald was a marksman in the Marines. He took 3 shots that day, and only one does the trick, catches Kennedy in the high rear portion of the head. An inch and a half higher, Oswald misses. We now know from Hinckley an inch over Reagan's dead. That's the difference between these assassinations being successful or not.
So 3 bullets in how many seconds?
About 8.2 seconds.
You accept that?
I agree.
You accept.
Yeah,
Oswald shot, using a weapon like this, shot 3 bullets. There was a magic bullet.
And the evidence is overwhelming, I think.
David?
The story of Oswald and the 3 shots that these guys believe in is Goldilocks and the 3 bears. He believes in a conspiracy 4 bears. Okay? But other than that, this thing is a total fraud based on a false autopsy because the body in President Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, according to the original medical documents, was shot from the front. By the time it gets to Bethesda, in a body bag and with head surgery, yes, it looked like it was shot from behind.
Here's the question I have. If we're sitting around and planning the assassination beforehand, we say, let's get rid of that no-good president. We're going to get rid of him. We're going to frame this guy Oswald, who's such a patsy, he's a dope. We'll pretend, but we'll pretend that somebody's shooting from behind.
Correct.
And we'll grab the president's body, we'll steal it, we'll take the brain out, we'll fake the autopsy, we'll fake the photographs, we'll do the x-rays, we'll fake the Zapruder film and all of this. I would say to you, why go through all of that? Hundreds of conspirators possibly could unravel. Why don't we just put the world-class assassin, instead of on the grassy knoll, put him behind the president? Let's shoot the president from the rear,
Gerald,
so that the real evidence is there. That's the simpler thing to do.
Have overlap. No, you can't shoot the president with a $12 rifle. And as you know from your writings about unintended consequences, is that they planned to shoot the president in a certain way and get those bullets out immediately. It did not happen, and there was a botched operation to alter that body before it got to Bethesda.
I'll tell you what I want to do. We have a film that the Secret Service took, a reenactment of what Oswald saw from the 6th floor depository building. I want to look at this film, and I want you to watch this. Now, this is what Lee Harvey Oswald would have seen. Now, the question I have for Gus and Gerald, why doesn't Oswald shoot now? I mean, wait, he's right in front of him. Oswald, he's right, the Kennedy is coming right toward him. Now, he waits. He waits. Let me finish. He waits until the car turns, and he fires the shots now as the car is moving away. Why doesn't he shoot?
Because you have to be standing in the 6th floor of the depository to understand this. And what happens if Oswald takes the first shot as the car is coming toward him, and we just saw in the film, he's completely exposed to the buildings to the left of him, which are as high as the Dallas School Book Depository. Everybody hanging out the window looking at the motorcade that day immediately sees the assassin in the middle of the window looking and firing down at the car. This is not a suicide mission. This is a man who wanted to get away. He has a chance of getting away if all they see out the window is just the barrel of the gun. Only a few witnesses see him. He does escape from Dealey Plaza, and if he doesn't run into the car, he gets away.
All the faces were facing Oswald. If he'd have taken the shot then, what he did was he had set up his perch with these boxes on the windowsill, faced long range downwind down the hill, away from when the viewers were all had their backs to the depository. He had pre-planned to shoot that way. Had he have shot Kennedy earlier on, he had to come out of his nest. But he had prepared that way.
But David, for you, that film supports, you think,
correct. That is one of the many implausibilities connected with this case, and it's always been inexplicable to me why Oswald wouldn't just fire one shot when he was so close.
You don't find this.
Now I explain that to you.
No, I don't.
You still don't find it. You're still
right. No, I don't find it a convincing explanation. No.
Okay, I'll tell you. We're going to take a break. You mentioned the autopsy. When we come back, we're going to talk about the autopsy that took place after Kennedy was assassinated. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to History Center. David, you left off. You were telling us about the autopsy and why you believe the autopsy was falsified.
Correct. The FBI reported when the body arrived, it was, quote, apparent that there had been surgery of the head area, namely in the top of the skull. Both FBI agents were deposed by the Assassination Records and Review Board in the mid-1990s. Both stood behind their report. Neither backed off. The staff member handling the whole area for the ARRB, Doug Horn, said, best evidence and the thesis it proposes is much stronger after our investigation. Here's the evidence. First of all, the FBI said there was surgery of the head area based on what the doctor said. Second of all, when you compare Dallas records with Bethesda, there's a 400% to 500% increase in the size of the fatal wound. And thirdly, the body arrived in a body bag. It left Dallas in a regular coffin.
And the reason why that's important is it was falsified to make it look as if a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, acted alone.
Shot from behind.
You shot from behind. In fact, you believe you were shot from the front.
I must tell you, we never accept in this country almost what FBI agents say if they observe something right in front of them. Now we have two FBI agents who aren't even doctors, and we're suddenly accepting what they say about surgery of the head. But here's the great thing. In David Lifton's theory, which I totally disagree with, as he knows, Mrs. Kennedy essentially has to be part of the conspiracy, Jackie Kennedy, because she's the one who's asked on the plane, returning to where do you want to have the president's autopsy done? And she says Bethesda because Jack was a naval man. Now, if you believe that there was a team of conspirators ready to come in and they were ready to fake the surgery and pretend that he was really shot from the back when he was shot from the front, they would have to have conspirator doctors at all of the area hospitals where she could have chosen to take him. And so essentially now we have hundreds of people on stand ready to go in and fake
No. And the Navy hospital is Jack's hospital.
But
just the way the Army hospital was Truman's hospital. And the radio communications show that body's going to Bethesda, period.
Oh, no, but she made that choice.
It's a pro forma choice.
David, as you also know, there are witnesses to the autopsy who say that Jack Kennedy wasn't brought in a body bag. You have some that say he was.
That's right. Why are there any that say he was?
Well, people make mistakes.
But here's
you choose to believe the ones you want to believe.
If I take two conflicting pieces of evidence, there's a car wreck, and somebody says the car was red, somebody else says green. I know they both can't be right, so I will weigh them, look at other evidence, and decide which one's right. What you do in your book, you're a prodigious researcher, and you do come up with these conflicting stories. And instead of saying which one's right, I'll determine one's wrong, you say they both must be right, and therefore you back into a theory that supports both, and the theory just is too far afield.
There is not a single Dallas doctor in the original medical records. I don't think there's a single doctor who says President Kennedy shot from behind.
They never turned him over. They never turned him over.
Because
they never turned him over.
Is that because
they were trying to save his life?
I don't believe it's because they never turned him over. That's the official government version.
But did they turn him over? But did they turn him over?
No, they did not turn him over.
No, they were trying to save his life, not determine where he shot from.
They see an exit wound in the back of the head. If we're going to focus on the wound that killed President Kennedy,
how could they see an exit wound in the back of the head when they never turned him over?
Because you could see the back of the head. In fact,
they had X-ray vision?
In Bethesda, there's a huge hole at the top of the head, which is not seen in Dallas. That's the most important thing to know. In fact, one nurse goes in there and says, I had to ask Perry.
I'll explain that. That huge hole at the top of the head is not only in Dallas, I'll tell you where it is. It's on the Zapruder film, which is maybe why you say it's fake, because you know the evidence is there. If you stop the frame, and anybody can go out and buy the DVD of the Zapruder film nowadays, and stop it at the moment that exit wound takes place, the entire right front top portion of the president's head blows out.
But the logical problem with all this is, David, I've never heard you say when this body alteration could have, physically happened. There's no time.
Oh, there's plenty of time.
No.
The body has to be gotten out of. We are dealing. Then we get into a whole other area of why Johnson delayed the flight and said, "I have to be sworn in." Bobby told me, and Bobby denies that he told him any such thing. It's the delay of the flight in Dallas when all this hanky-panky
listen
starts.
How complex this is, and that's why I say let's put the common sense hat on here. Wouldn't you say, if you were the conspirators, you're about to pull off the perfect crime, the President of the United States is about to be murdered, you want to frame this guy for shooting behind, instead of going through all of this that could unravel at any point, wouldn't you just put an assassin behind the President and shoot him from there?
I got a better one. Why couldn't you just take the Oswald rifle and plant it in front where your shooter is? And
you can't have the rifle. It's going to be the frame-up rifle. You can't have that in the same place where you have the real assassins for a number of reasons.
The reason he says that is because he knows he doesn't have a book if he does that.
No. The reason I say that is logically it doesn't work.
Unfortunately, we're out of time in this segment. When we come back, I have a question for you. And that is, if you're right, why do about 90% of the American public believe conspiracy theories like the one proposed by David Lifton? So we're going to take a break. We're going to go back and get an answer to that question. Stay with us. Welcome back to History Center. Gerald, what's the answer to the question? Why do people believe David if you're so right?
Well, I think, first of all, because they've heard all these questions over the years about the assassination, the single bullet couldn't have happened, these mystery witnesses were killed over time. We don't trust our government. We've come not to believe it. They've read too many books like David's. They've seen the Oliver Stone film. They haven't read Case Closed. And in the end, we want to believe in some ways that this great charismatic president, John Kennedy, he couldn't have been taken down by a 23-year-old, just turned 24-year-old sociopath, Lee Harvey Oswald, with, as David always says, a $12 rifle. But sometimes the answers in history are actually that simple. In this case, much to people's disappointment, if they actually study the case, they'll find out that is the answer of what happened.
That has to be the last word. Gentlemen, this was a great discussion. I learned a lot. We're going to have you all back. We're going to do this again. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.